that instrumental, ladies and gentlemen, we usher in the raw leadership talk. Glad to have Dr. Paul Kariuki back for this candid discussion on matters ethical leadership. Where are you tuning in from? We're glad to connect with you. Stay tuned and enjoy the discussion. In a moment, we'll go to the discussion of the day. Right here, the Raw Leadership Talk. Coming to you live from the Africa Center for Public Speaking. Thank you very much. Dr. Paul, how have you been?
Yes, I've been winning, my brother. I'm so glad to be back again on the show, and I'm looking forward for a conversation tonight.
Wonderful. How is Durban doing?
Durban is nice. We call it a miracle city after we went through a tough time with the severe flooding that was really quite catastrophic. We lost more than 450 lives, and yeah, we saw very bad scenario, but we're still calling it a miracle city. It's still being rebuilt, and I believe we shall bounce back to where we've been.
Wonderful. Today we're talking about ethical leadership, and the benefits of ethical leadership, as well as the pitfalls of unethical leadership. So why ethical leadership is needed, Dr. Paul? Why do you think ethical leadership is needed?
Well, I would like to begin first by just recapping about how we defined what ethical leadership is, for the sake of those who have not been part of our conversation. And for those who have been there, just to remind ourselves what we said, what ethical leadership is. And we defined ethical leadership as that type of leadership that espouses and demonstrates appropriate conduct in terms of personal behavior and beliefs. And it creates a room on opportunity for individuals to be guided by a set of values that help them to fit into society and earn people's trust and be like what leadership mentor Dr. John Maxwell says, you earn the right to be followed. Leadership, as we said, is nothing else but influence. And therefore, if a leader cannot be able to create suitable influence, whether good or bad, for people to follow them, then they're not leading. But here we're talking about positive leadership. That is leadership that is guided by values and is also bounded by principles that people espouse as important and give them a chance to pursue common good. So from that basis, when we talk about the benefits of ethical leadership, there are quite several of them, and I'm going to touch only on about 5 for the sake of time. The first benefit of leadership that is ethical is that leaders are able to promote, ethical leaders by nature promote royalty in their organizations or in society per se, because they have created a room for trust, and people are able to embrace the values that guide their own living. That's why we said in the last show that it's very important for leaders, ethical leaders in this case, to be very conscious of their conduct, because we said it's what they do rather than what they say. And people embrace their work with them or earn their right to follow them because they see that their conduct represents a certain of values and principles that resonate with the public. So the first thing that benefits, why it's needed, is to mobilize people behind them towards a common good. The second thing is that great ethical leadership creates a culture of trust and respect within society. And I remember saying in the last show, we should, every time as a public, when we get disappointed by the caliber of leaders we see, I said that leaders are a mirror of the society. If we don't like what we see, it's actually who we are, because we are reproducing after ourselves. And so when we see leaders we don't like, before we throw stones at them, we should ask ourselves, is this who we are as a people? You see, because ethical leadership always creates a culture. There is something about what they espouse that makes what society is. And so it's very important to say that it's needed to create a society that is based on trust. It's very difficult for a trust society to be a whole, as a wholesome nation or a wholesome community or a wholesome family, if it's not bounded by trust. And we've seen around the world many
Yes.
countries and many communities breaking because people don't trust each other. They have gone into war and conflicts because of that element of trust that is missing. The third thing why this is important and is needed, it because by creating a culture of trust and respect, it also builds confidence. People are
Mhm.
confident in ethical leaders. And the opposite is true. They don't have confidence in unethical leaders, which we're going to talk later into this show. Why
Yes.
it's very important to promote ethical leadership right from the crash. I always say, start from the crash.
Mhm.
Instill values of respect, honesty, integrity, accountability right from the cradle,
But
because
let
it's
me
very.
let me ask you something, Dr. Paul,
Mhm.
in relation when it comes to politics.
Yes.
This side of the world, we seem, and I don't know whether other parts of the world is the same, we seem
Mhm.
to desire ethical leadership in the corporate world, in the religious world. But why is it that when it comes to politics, people seem to lower the standards, and either consciously or unconsciously, so that they might know this person is unethical, but they will say nobody is perfect, and they still go for this particular person.
It is what I would summarize that to say it's the power of choice.
Mhm.
People make choices, whether good or bad, sometimes by saying we can live with the consequences. Easier
Mhm.
said than done until the choices start backfiring on them in terms of discomfort, in terms of disruption of their own lives, in terms of conflict, and the things that go with that kind of choices. Now, unfortunately, we tend to have different sets of values for political leaders than those that we have, for example, in the corporate world or in the faith community. But
Yes.
leadership is leadership. And the standards, in fact, for the public service should be even more higher, because
Yes.
the denomination here is that these individuals are choosing to put their interests aside to serve
Mhm.
the public
Mhm.
selflessly. Unfortunately, because now you're talking about politics, we have a set of leaders, majority
Yes.
of them, whose interest is not for the public, that
Mhm.
elected them to the positions of leadership. And that is why it's such a confusion in society today around the world. People make these kinds of choices around the world. It's not a Kenyan situation, it's not a South African situation, it's around the world. The
Yes.
power of choices, people making choices, wrong choices knowingly, that there is this kind of, what will I call it? I'll call it a sense of abdicating responsibility. To say
Yes.
you will hear statements, we didn't have a choice. No, you had a
Mhm.
choice. You just made a
Mhm.
bad one. And
Yes.
when you make a bad one, then also make a room for living with consequences. Either
Mhm.
way, if you make a good choice, you will live with good choice with good outcomes. If you
Yes.
make a bad one, also make room for the consequences that will come out of that choice. And we've
Yes.
seen nations paying very dearly, we've seen communities paying very dearly, we've seen organizations paying very dearly whenever they
Yes.
make a wrong choice as far as leadership is concerned.
Wonderful thoughts right there. For those who are tuning in, we are discussing about ethical leadership, the benefits, the pitfalls, why ethical leadership is needed. Bernard Mundu, seeing you. You say you are following from Mombasa, Kenya. Thank you very much. Keep those comments coming. And if you have questions, you want to engage in this particular discussion, we are more than glad to have you into this particular discussion. Dr. Paul, I'm sure the way you have discussed about ethical leadership, why it's needed, and the benefit, definitely there are pitfalls of unethical leadership. What are these pitfalls of unethical leadership? And please discuss with us the impact of these pitfalls on the nation, organization, community, and even families.
Very true. I think it's a very tragic situation when we see these pitfalls actually playing out in society, especially
Yes.
as a result of the choices we make as a public. But one of those a few of these characteristics that show, pitfalls of unethical leadership is a low
Yes.
sense of self-esteem as a nation. It's
Yes.
worse when it's at an individual level where a person does not believe in their own value as a person.
Yes.
When it
Mm-hmm.
hits a nation, it cripples the possibility of a nation to become a global citizen. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, you have seen nations that have become permanent beggars because a
Mm-hmm.
nation is endowed with mineral wealth, for example, and other
Mm-hmm.
natural gifts that they could be leveraging around the world and become a super economic base. But because of
Yes.
low esteem, even the power of negotiation is taken away. You see,
Mm-hmm.
so what an ethical leadership does, it takes that sense of self-esteem as a nation and as a people, where we find even people from different communities or nations cannot even integrate themselves with the global world confidently because they tend to think they are second rate, third rate, whatever rate they want to call themselves. And that's one of the tragic consequences of unethical leadership. The other one is loss of trust as a
Mm-hmm.
society.
Yes.
When a society becomes what I would call paranoid, we talk of individuals who are paranoid. Believe you me, there are
Mm-hmm.
nations that are paranoid. As soon as you step into that nation, everybody wants to flee away because nobody trusts the other person. And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes very difficult for such countries or for such people or such society to prosper because you
Mm-hmm.
cannot live in the shadow of yourself. You see,
Yes.
but when that element of self esteem has been replaced by a sense of helplessness, then we
Yes.
look at other settings, default settings, that gives us a little bit of a sense of worth, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
pseudo worth because the real worth is when a nation is able to co-create a future together with itself,
Mm-hmm.
involving people in partnership with their leadership. But when the leadership is unethical, it's very difficult to harness partnership, meaningful partnership with the people that they lead. And so one of the pitfalls of unethical leadership is when it erodes away the sense of trust from the people that they
Mm-hmm.
choose to lead. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other sense of it, of course, is to raise high levels of anxieties. Nations
Yeah.
that are led by unethical leadership are full of anxiety. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
knows. They always live in the shadow of yesterday because tomorrow is
Yes.
never guaranteed. Yeah. And you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine when our society around the world is ridden with conflict, for example, in
Yes.
those countries, people do not foresee tomorrow as coming because even today is like a future.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a sense of fear, there is a sense of frustration, and there is a sense of anxiety because nobody knows which way the leadership will take the nation. It's a very
Yes.
bad place to be. And that's why it's important for talk shows like this ones where we talk about these critical aspects of our societal existence to be really taken seriously because it's a dilemma in our society today.
I see this, and that's a very wonderful point, Dr. Paul. But I see this kind of circle in this side of the world, especially when it comes to democratic leadership, where people will never really vet a leader very well, and then they will elect him thinking that is ethical. Then we begin to see this series of pitfalls of unethical leadership, and
Mhm.
then we will come and refuse to elect that person, elect another one under excitement without again vetting that person, and then we go again through the same cycle of unethical leadership pitfalls. I mean, I don't know, but what do you think would be the antidote for such kind of mentality, especially in this side of the world? I think around 8 countries in Africa are going to the election, to the ballot this year. Kenya, we are actually counting days before August 9th. We are going to the election. How do we avoid such kind of cycles?
That's a very powerful, I think it's a very powerful point to discuss because going back to what I just said about the power of choice that has not been taken away from people, in
Mhm.
politics and in democratic societies, we say our power as citizens is in our vote. Yeah.
Yes.
And so long as there is a democratic process that allows everyone to participate in a civic process, such as an election, the
Yes.
greatest power that every individual in that country has is their vote. And therefore, we always say that use your vote wisely, cast it wisely, be informed, and make good choice. Now, how can we fix this? From a leadership point of view, is to encourage leaders to do the following things. Number one, they need not to ignore boundaries. Yeah. They
Yes.
must, in other words, I say they need to adhere to ethical codes of public service and
Mm-hmm.
public leadership. And God forbid that they will do the opposite. Unfortunately, not all the time, but most of the time, we see some of them doing just the opposite. They do those things that have been forbidden in their ethical
Mm-hmm.
conduct code of codes for public service. So the one
Yes.
way to fix it is to make sure that there is enforcement to adhere to ethical codes of public service. The second thing they
Mm-hmm.
need to do is to ensure that they lead by example. Do not be a crowd follower as a leader if you do not have a set of principles and values. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, our mentor, Dr. John Maxwell, says, if you do not stand for anything, you will fall for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And as a leader, you must have something that you stand for. I stand for honesty. I stand
Mm-hmm.
for transparency. I stand for accountability. I stand for ethical service. All those things, you are not wishing them. Your life as a leader must be able to demonstrate those values in practice. In
Yes.
other words, you're willing even to bow out of a leadership opportunity if it goes against your personal values that you've promised the public. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
easier said than done, but it's one of the most important thing to see. How
Yes.
can we enforce ethical leadership in our society? The third
Yeah.
thing, of course, is to ensure that we adhere to a moral compass. There are things that we know, either being taught through faith, the different religions that we espouse to, that
Yes.
teach us the things that are right and the things that are wrong. A
Mm-hmm.
leader must be bound by those moral compass values that have been ingrained in us. And it's amazing. Majority of our countries in Africa, and especially in Kenya, for example, we say we are almost 90% Christians, right? So
Mm-hmm.
meaning beneath our existence is a set of values, biblical values,
Mm-hmm.
that do shape how we live with each other. And we have other faiths there, like the Muslim community, the Hindu community, which I believe also they have their own sets of values.
Ethical code. Yes.
Yes, ethical values that help them to live and coexist with people. As a
Mm-hmm.
nation that is very, very much steeped into religious values and principles, we should be able to be generating
Yes.
leadership at all levels of society that is bound by these common values. There is, for example,
Mm-hmm.
there is no religion, whether Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whichever one, that promotes, that promotes um, death or killing people, for example. There
Yes.
is no one. All religions promote the sanctity of life.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have a leader who comes to say the opposite or
Yes.
promote the opposite. You see, so the moment leadership starts promoting an ethical principles that go against the values that we know as a society, especially we African people, because we
Mm-hmm.
are a very religious, continent. We
Mm-hmm.
need to stand with those values that do define who we are as a people. And of course, then we have all these connecting values, like we say in South Africa, Ubuntu. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
I am because you are. I see you
Yes.
as my African brother and sister, irrespective of my color, irrespective of my ethnicity, irrespective of my language, irrespective of my religion affiliation, my political ideology, all those things that do create division. Ubuntu as a principle says, I see you as a person. I value you as a human being, and I see you as an African. That is why some of the leaders in our continent have promoted, for example, this idea of no visas as you visit their countries. And
Yes.
majority of African countries are still struggling with that idea that somebody can come, an African can come into from country X to country
Mm-hmm.
B without having a visa. Imagine if we are
Yes.
to remove those things that really
Yes.
do limit our ability to interact with each other properly. We will go far as a society, but all that hinges on leadership. And now those values are the ones that shape us, the way we integrate as a continent with the rest of the world. The rest of the world has a lot to learn from us as African people,
Mhm.
but we need to do things right.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. My friend Elia Chocolare, thank you very much for tuning in. And Eli says something here that I find very, very uh, candid. He says, perhaps we ought to think also about an ethical society. If our groundswell of an ethical critical mass would emerge, we might see a leadership force towards ethical behavior, if only for self-preservation. And I tend to agree with him that we need an ethical society, because right now maybe leaders take advantage of an unethical society because they come out of that unethical society. But if we have ethical society, then even if the leader becomes unethical, then the ethical society can push the unethical leader to surrender. I don't know what you think about that, Dr. Paul.
I think that's very spot on. I think, as I said earlier again, that the leadership we see is a mirror of our society. So what we see in leadership, it's what we have produced and generated as society. So if we don't like what we see, then we need to change ourselves as a society. And I agree with that value from that point of view to say, if we are unhappy with unethical leadership, then we need to promote ethical living in society so that we
Mhm.
raise ethical leaders from below. They don't fall from sky. They
Mhm.
are living amongst us. They are
Yes.
our brothers and sisters. They are our uncles and aunties. They are our grandpas. They are living with us. But what we do as a society is that we permit those value systems that do not espouse who we are. And over
Mhm.
time, there is then that critical mass of people who think differently on how we should be able to govern ourselves. And
Mhm.
eventually we even get to a place of being convinced that we need to have some of those in leadership. And then of course one thing leads to the next. And before we know, we have a humongous problem in society that we can even hardly even recall how did all this begin. The bottom
Mhm.
line is this: it's a power of choice. When you
Yes.
discover you're on a wrong road, you don't continue in that road. Or if you discover yourself in a hole, you don't continue digging. You look for
Mhm.
a way to get out of the hole, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, if you use that analogy in ethical leadership, when we discover society we are going in the wrong direction, the right thing is to stop and return and look for the right way. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the right way might begin to say, how do we raise ethical leaders right from our own household? What do we tell
Yes.
our children? How do we
Mhm.
talk to each other? What values do we espouse as a family? Because families make society, you see.
Mhm.
So if we start fixing families, there's a very high probability we'll fix the society. And then after we fix society, we generate leaders from different sets of families that come up and emerge with a leadership potential. But we know at least the common denominator is that there is a set of principles that we espouse and believe. We recognize them as sound
Mhm.
principles for common good. That is our challenge today.
Wonderful thoughts, wonderful thoughts. Martin Ocheng there says, when we get 99% of ethical leaders in a society, then I think we will get a society which is full of moral standards. I think that is true. I know our standards most of the time are low, and that's why we don't think we can even attain 99% of ethical leaders. But I
Mm.
think we can if we endeavor to set our standards so high so that anybody who comes into power, like in Singapore, will indeed make sure that they are ready to serve in the right way. Dr.
Mm.
Paul, as we bring this discussion to an end, in a nutshell, what would you say are the causes of ethical leadership failures?
I think I would classify those into two, one as individuals and the others as organizational. At an individual level, one of the failures of an ethical of leadership that or something that promotes unethical leadership is like what I'd said before, when people ignore boundaries. If an
Mhm.
organization, as an individual in an organization, as a leader, I choose to ignore the values of my organization and the
Mhm.
policies that guide our existence, I'm promoting a different culture, and that culture will definitely, demean what leadership is all about. The other part of
Yes.
it, of course, is saying that there is a lack of moral compass as a leader, as an individual. When there is no self-control and boundaries that make you, and a consciousness that always tells you this is wrong and this is right, don't do this, don't go that direction, don't interact there. All of us have that conscience, and when we
Mhm.
ignore the conscience, it's very easy to fall into an ethical practice or behavior, and that becomes a leader's blind spot over time. Of course,
Mhm.
the other times or other causes at an individual level is when we fail to pay attention to
Yes.
things that we know have a high probability of taking us in the wrong direction. It could be
Mhm.
associations, it could be material that we're interacting with, that affects our moral or morality. It could be, wrong use of power in an
Mhm.
organization, and so that an individual starts doing things by using positional power for self promotion or self interest and not in the interest of all others. And once it begins now from an individual level, it goes into an organizational level. When it gets to an organizational level, we start creating anxiety within the workplace. When people do
Mhm.
not know what the leadership stands for anything, there's a lot of anxiety. And productivity starts failing because
Yes.
people are now do not know where to go, who to follow, whose voice is more important, what are the codes that we should be adhering to as an organization, and the list goes on. And then after that, what happens now, we start experiencing what I call we do not have now positive role models who
Yes.
people can look up to. And that is one of the tragedies of our society today. You will have to look so deep and so far to find a role model that you can say, me as Dan, I'm pegging
Mhm.
my interest on individual X. Because when you
Mhm.
look at individual X, we don't have that, the confidence to say, can this individual take this that far, this issue that I'm really concerned about? And that is
Mhm.
one of the dilemmas we are suffering from. And of course, over time, when people lack accountability and start encouraging, dishonesty practices within
Mhm.
organizations and within society, that is one way to know that we are heading in the wrong direction. And we
Mhm.
have a lot of cases around the world today in different societies, in different countries, where leaders have been found wanting time and again when they're not
Yes.
able to demonstrate honesty, where betrayal has become the rule of the day. And it's easy to drop off somebody or someone or even a nation at the click of a finger because we've lost those values that we espoused that really bounded us as far as accountability is concerned.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Paul. This has been a wonderful discussion. Eddie there says this has been a very good, excellent thoughts from the good doctor. Thank you very much for the value you add to the raw leadership talk and the time that you take even to research on these topics of discussion so that we can give value to society. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wonderful discussion here. We keep it raw with the raw leadership talk, and I want to believe that you have benefited and you will continue becoming a good ambassador. If we want the society to change or the world to change or the nation to change, it can't change unless first we change as individuals. If I become ethical, I believe then I can inspire people to be ethical enough. And also when people aspire to be ethical, then we create a society, a nation that is ethical enough. And we will reap the benefit at the end of the day. May God bless you and see you next Tuesday right here as we conclude this topic of ethical leadership. How do we fix this menace of unethical leadership in this side of the world? Thank you very much and see you next week.